Three, two, one. Hello and welcome to this Care Leaders Network podcast. My name's Simon. I am the founder and chief executive of CLN. And today I'm welcomed by Nick Martin, who is the managing director of the Aedifice Partnership. This is a sector commentary conversation, and we're going to be talking about how galloping inflation is impacting the cost of building care homes. Now, Nick is a care home construction expert, so it's brilliant to have you on the show.
Hi, well, thanks, Simon. Thank you. I'm very welcome. Thank you very much.
Good to have you on the conversation today. I think like anyone that's building care homes at the moment is talking about the fact that the cost of building care homes is a challenge. Talk to me about what's going on in the context of building care homes and the challenges that people are facing at the moment with all of the things that are happening in the world.
Sure. Well, I guess everybody's impacted by the same things fundamentally. So the thing that started the process was really a Brexit and pressure on materials and labour caused by Brexit, and then we've had on top of that we've had COVID, which has caused a whole new set of issues, and then Ukraine, of course, and these had a lot of impact on everybody's lives. They've caused delays. All kinds of delays. They've caused increased costs and volatility of costs of materials, costs and also availability of labour. And probably the worst thing is the uncertainty and the fear that comes with that uncertainty. So, it's really been a perfect storm, which has been brewing for 2 or 3 years now, and it's we've never not been able to release ourselves from it for some time. So, yeah, I mean, it's a difficult for everybody at the moment, but the construction sector is really being hit quite badly by it.
Yeah, seems like there's pressure coming from all angles. Talk to me a little bit about kind of you and your background. Obviously, you're an authority in this respect, but talk a little bit about kind of you and what you do at Aedifice Partners.
Sure. So we're chartered surveyors. We are chartered quantity surveyors, and building surveyors is our strap line effectively. But in reality, we project manage a lot of care home development, both new build and refurbishment. Something like 70 to 80% of our work is care related in one way or another. We manage somewhere in the region of £100 million worth of construction at any one time, both pre, post, and during construction. We work throughout the UK, so we've got a fairly good handle on costs and issues across the UK sector of care.
Got you. Yeah, no, that's really helpful, because I think we were introduced by Joanne Balmer at Oakland Care, if I remember well, who obviously they've been their whole growth strategy for the business is building care homes, and I know you work closely with the team there. So talk to me. I guess one of the things that we talked about earlier, you talked about the kind of the landscape, the different things that are going on. Is there anything kind of in particular? You talked about Brexit, COVID, the war in Ukraine. I guess they're all impacting the set of circumstances. Is there anything that you would say is kind of the standout? Is there a particular main cause, or is it just kind of the collection of everything that's going on that's causing pressure across the board?
Yeah, I think it is a collection in the sense of the impact and the fear of the impact of several of those. So all of those elements really. So it's largely driven by uncertainty and also demand. I mean, you have to put this in the backdrop of construction, where it's had a very successful period in terms of volume of construction work. So there's been pressure on materials and labour anyway, just because people are building more. There's a lot of infrastructure projects and stuff happen post-COVID. There's been a lot to talk about investment and stuff like that. So it's not all doom and gloom. The issue is more about managing the change and the demand, and also the cost increase. So it's really costs are the thing which sort of bite the most, if you like, in terms of where you see all these problems, because delays cost money, and they cost money to all different elements of the process: clients, contractors, and funders. So it's a cost related thing really, but it comes at us from various different angles.
Got you. Everything's kind of all playing into the scenario, and we're seeing it play out. I guess that's how it's playing out kind of more generally. Like what exactly does that mean, and how is it playing out specifically for people building care homes? Obviously the cost is higher, but what does that mean fundamentally for people?
So currently, of course, we've got the issue of increase in tender prices. We're looking at somewhere there's various prediction figures rather than projections of for increasing costs, but we're looking at something like 10 to 11%, that sort of region of increased cost during the past year for tender prices. The backdrop to that is a huge increase of material costs. Material costs have been projected to have been increasing around about 16%. And behind that, there's some even more massive figures. Basically, steelwork increases by 50%, 70%. There's some underlying really big increases in costs which have occurred over the past year or so, which have really factored into that. That's caused an overall tender price increase, which has been seen really over the past 2 years. Whereas you may have had a care home which costs, our average sort of 70-bed care home, 7.5 million to build on a design and build type contract, we're now looking at 8.5, 9 million for the same build. That's a 2-year process. So that's the kind of volume of inflation, if you like, over a 2-year period. And that gives you a flavour of how it's impacted the sort of end result of the care home construction as a new build facility.
Sure, got you. I mean, it's a big old hike, isn't it? And I guess with these sets of circumstances, it's probable that things won't go back down. Although maybe we won't be in such inflationary period of time. We're expecting apparently the government saying they expect the inflation number to halve in the next 6 months, but we'll wait and see whether that happens. But even when things do level off, which I'm sure they will do in time, I guess is the concern at the moment that those fees, that the overall costs and things like that will be maintained at such a significant increase.
So there's different pressures in there. So we've seen the material prices that I referred to earlier, but there's obviously now we're talking about wage inflation, and that's really a twofold factor. Really, one is that clearly people want more money because the cost of living's gone up, but the other factor is the lack of labour. So we've seen, starting with the Brexit process, and we've seen it as carers as well as construction workers. So they suffer the same real problems with supply of labour. I was talking to somebody the other day, and they reckon there was 160,000 spaces effectively for carers, and that's not too dissimilar from the construction issues, of labour on construction sites, and particularly particular trades and elements like that. So yeah, we've got those issues factoring in, and I think so. The reality is, material prices are stabilising to a degree, and that's good news. So we're looking at a more stable material market. The volatility we've had over the last year or two has been unbelievable, where contractors have not been able to project their costs, and they've signed up a project on a fixed cost, and they're then stuck with a doubling of some of their material costs. So that's been a real factor. But now we're looking at a leveling of the material market, but then the inflation on wages being the factor. So I think that they're going through to next year. The issue is not going to be so much materials. There's ways of mitigating that as well, but actually it's going to be the availability and cost of labour, which are going to be the factor which is really going to impact on project delivery and costs.
Right, that makes sense. That just breaking it down in that sense is makes it really, really clear. And I guess it's not that much of a surprise that the construction industry is experiencing similar things to the care sector. It seems like there's a workforce shortage. Whoever you speak to in any industry, everyone's kind of feeling the bite. I was speaking to a firm of accountants the other day. They're in a similar set of circumstances. They can't find great qualified people to join their team, and apparently that's impacting the their ability to take on new tenders. And I guess we're probably hearing a similar story in care and in construction, and probably in all sorts of different sectors as well. Obviously, from a living wage or minimum wage perspective, it's important that people are paid commensurate to or at least more closely commensurate to what it is that they deserve to be paid, of course. But that money's got to come from somewhere. And I mean, if I'm right in saying this, quite a lot of construction companies have actually gone bust. I'm aware of a couple that have gone bust in kind of the last 18 months that are involved in the care sector. The guys at Principled Care, I think they might have even had 2 construction companies go bust on them in the building of one or renovation of one care home, which that's not going to be much fun. And then there was Greswold Construction in the Midlands. They've been going for kind of 40 years. They ended up, unfortunately, I think they had to put the business into liquidation towards the back end of last year as well. So people are feeling the pinch from every angle, and it's obviously having implications for people, as you say. If you put in a tender for a fixed cost, and then things go up so significantly in price and things like that, there's in some sets of circumstances, I guess some of these businesses have just been left with nowhere to go.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and I think we're just on the tip of that iceberg at the moment. That we really in construction, things take a while to follow through, don't they? So you've got prices of construction projects which were agreed maybe 2 years ago now, and they're coming through to their completion, or even a year ago. And the change in material and labour prices is really impacted on that, because they're having to soak that up, and if they've got a fixed price contract, and the majority of them are, then where do they go to soak this up? And it's a real problem, and I think we are really just starting to see the impacts of that now in the construction sector. I was talking to somebody only yesterday who is putting their company into liquidation because they have no projects which are making any money. They're either breaking even or losing on their projects. So their only option is to liquidate. So, I think we are really just seeing the start of that process, which is the end process of, if you like, of all this volatility over the past couple of years, and their need to spend money to fill gaps in subcontractors who have not performed due to labor or COVID or whatever it's been. So yeah, we've had a number of projects where contractors have said, look, we know we can't ask for this money, but actually we've lost X pounds through this process, and so we know it's really impacted. And contractors can manage it well or badly, but if they've managed it well, they'll come out reasonably well from it. If they've managed it badly, or have had a bad set of circumstances on their projects, then yeah, they suffer a huge loss. And this is the issue of delays. It's not just the material and labour. Projects have been delayed because of COVID, and that they can't come to a client necessarily and ask for more money, because COVID isn't necessarily a reason for claims for damages. Or it isn't. The contractors have to soak up those costs of running a site for an extended period, and that takes it straight out of their bottom line. So yeah, it's been a difficult period, but we now see the result. We're now seeing the results of that, which is all this issue of contractors going to liquidation.
Talk to me about the landscape for next year. You touched on a couple of points, but I guess just elaborate on that for me, and just break that down for us. So
there's some good news and bad news, I think, in that respect. In that, as I've said, that there is some stabilizing the material prices, and if you look at some of the projections for material prices next year, you see them actually. I've seen a couple of projections that say they're actually going not increasing. They're actually staying very stable. I think in reality, because of the pressures of labour and other elements, I think we'll still see an inflationary increase in material costs. across the board. It's very hard to project it in terms of individual elements, but I think it'll be a much more realistic. Say I think some projections talk about like a 4% increase in material costs, and I think it'll be of a single digit, more manageable figure in reality. So that's a good news element. The issue of supply is still a problem, and that needs to be managed. And the long lead times for some components. Brexit is still there. We still got issues of importing stuff from Europe, and that needs to be managed. The big thing for next year really is the labour shortage, the acute labour shortage, and that's not going away, and it's being added to by the fact that people are wanting more money, not unsurprisingly. So I think that's going to be our cost increase element, is going to be how we manage labour going forward for the next year, and I think that's twofold. One is managing our expectations in terms of performance, speed, and also trying to I think nationally, I think it's something we need to manage. The government need to manage in terms of labour, and this is across a number of sectors where we're talking about semi-skilled or low-paid skilled workers. There is just a massive shortage, and that it's been a factor for some time that NHS, everybody's suffering from this factor. Hospitality, you name it, any industry that relies on volume labour is struggling at the moment. So I think that's something that has to be resolved. And then I think the other elements sort of going forward into next year is obviously the one we've just talked about, which is the liquidation of contractors. That is an issue, and suppliers, because that's going to fuel an already difficult environment. Inflation, it has been talked about a lot. As I said, we're talking about projected figures around about 4%. And BCIs, as I said, talk about increase in labour, but actually a decrease in material costs. But if we look at around 4% increase in costs during the year, I think we're probably not far away based on the projections. It is only guesswork, but they are projections that are by people that are at it. And then there's obviously the stability of borrowing, because as clients in care home market, they need to borrow money to do these things. That's been tricky over the past 6 months, but I think I see that stabilizing into 2023. There's also the slightly more negative thing of the reduction in other sectors. So I think commercial and housing markets will and are projected to cut back a bit in 2023. That will help stop the fueling of the increase of demand for construction, which will help control some of these inflationary elements and also availability of labour and materials, so which has been a factor as well. And I think the other big thing here is not just construction, but actually there's been a big problem pre-contract, which we need to consider. So planning delays and stuff like that are a real issue. And that's going to be an ongoing problem. I can't see any light at the end of the tunnel, of the planning tunnel. If you understand that, that's been a real issue of getting projects off the ground for us and for many of our clients and other people in the sector. It really doesn't help that we can't get things to site quick enough. And that's something which is still going to impact us in 2023.
And is that just backlog in local authorities in the planning office, or are there more things at play there?
It's hard to. I mean, I don't work in a local authority, so I don't know their pressures. I mean, a lot of people have been working from home, and during COVID we saw a real downturn in speed and performance. Mainly because of COVID. I think there's been an underlying issue of inability to appoint enough planning officers, which is another issue. But I think that the sort of performance of local authority planning departments has really gone downhill over the past year, 18 months or more even. But it's. There's been great talk about streamlining and improving the planning process, but in reality, the localism agendas and all these sorts of things. But in reality, it hasn't actually changed at the moment. Nothing has been done that's fundamentally changed the planning process. And if you really want to, get stuck into developing and making the UK work better, the planning process has to be more streamlined. And it's a government issue, but I think as an industry, we need to factor that in, and work out ways of at least mitigating that issue.
So there's the mitigation of cost, which we should definitely have a conversation about. I think if I was a care provider thinking about building care homes, I think probably the biggest thing I'd be scared of is the contractor going bust, during a project. I mean, that's costly. It could be disastrous from a lead time perspective. The implications of that are obviously really, really, really quite significant. As I say, I really feel for the people for the team at Principal Care, because I think it happened to them twice, which is that must just be so heart-wrenching, to be so far behind where they wanted to be. I know they worked hard to turn it into a positive, but it's never going to be the most fun.
Certainly not.
Are there any things that can be? Are there any things that you can do to spot telltale signs, to maybe be able to foresee if the construction company you're working with maybe is having issues that you're aware of?
Yeah, I mean, these things are always very difficult. We have managed, not recently, thank God, but we have managed in the past issues of liquidation of contractors. So we have experience of that. But yeah, I mean, how you manage that is a real good question, because in reality, data on company performance is outdated. It's only as good as the accounts they submitted 18 months ago potentially. So which doesn't give you a flavor of really how they're managing. So yes, you can look up performance, and obviously one of the key indicators is how fast they pay their subcontractors and suppliers. And that's an early warning sign of issues, which can be picked up on things like Experian and other sites where they do credit checking sites. So that's something you can do to check that. I think in terms of contractors, it's looking at the exposure to fixed price contracts that they've had over the past. Maybe they've negotiated 2 years, 18 months ago, and having a realistic conversation about that with them. I think if you're looking at appointing new contractors, obviously the due diligence you do in that sector, that in that way is important, and it's important to have the conversations with them and to do some assessment behind the scenes of their exposure. And if you can get feedback from subcontractors and people like that, then that's helpful. It's also about relationships. Most of the care home contractors we work with, we have a long-term working relationship with, because they're not just a one project pony. We've worked with them on a number of projects. You get a flavour for how people are and whether they're reacting to your requests for information, whether they're how their subcontractors are behaving, what's going on sites. And from that, you can start to feel whether things are going slightly wrong, and then you can have the conversations and discussions. It's sometimes it can be quite quick. I mean, in terms of the process a few years ago, when lots of contractors went bust because they were doing renegotiation with a number of care clients of projects based on costs from projects 2 years ago. You finish this one for us, we'll give you an extra 5%, do the next project. And that caught a lot of contractors out, maybe, I don't know, 6, 7, 8 years ago, when that happened. But it can often be like one project where there's a late payment, an interim payment, and it takes a contractor out. So it can be actually quite quick and quite difficult to predict. But I think there is some due diligence that can be done, and having the right team, on your side, taking you through this and managing this process helps that. And also managing the process of construction, so the impact of a liquidation is minimized. It's one thing, contractor going into administration. There's another thing, actually making sure the project's finished. And obviously it's partly about the timing of the liquidation in the project, but also about how you manage costs through the project, so that you're not exposing you or the contractor to unnecessary risk. And that's about careful management. And that's going to be one of the key issues over the next year or so, as we get out of this this process, and we see potential for liquidation.
Sure, that makes sense. So it's about doing the due diligence up front, and then I guess just being available on site and just keeping an eye out for things that might raise alarm bells, if you like. I guess that's probably the thing to do in the set circumstances where if you're currently in build. So that makes a lot of sense. Thank you. Let's talk practical steps that people can take to mitigate construction costs, because I'm sure there's things that people can do to make sure that they're not being had over a barrel. Where do people get those gains back? What do they need to focus on to make sure that the costs just don't spiral out of control?
Sure. I mean, yeah, the first thing is to look at your pre-contract stage. So obviously that we've talked about planning issues. So it's if you're looking at a multiple project type procurement over a number of years, putting more in the pot will help you get stuff out on a timely basis, because obviously delays in getting stuff through planning and getting stuff to site will cost you money. So if you can afford to, or if you're looking at multiple projects, then putting more into planning, getting hedging your bets, if you like, on the planning process will help, in terms of you then have a choice of, okay, I've got planning consent for these 2 projects coming up. I can go with either of them. What am I going to do? So I there's a pretty good possibility of getting one of the 2 out on time. So and that's a sort of hedging your bets and investing in the pre-construction process in terms of timing, if you can do that, of course. The other elements really are looking at your design, trying to make your design flexible. So are we making this scheme complicated? Are we making this scheme out of materials which are limited? They are limited where they come from, and it's working with your architect to work through, and your project management team to work through that at planning stage, because there's no point in coming up with a very wonderful ornate building and then finding in the construction process that you can't afford to build it, or you can't procure the material. So it's flexibility and in a sense simplicity, because obviously that you want to use the contractor's knowledge to provide the best value scheme for you, and that you don't want to tie them completely down. Most carers are most concerned about how the interior works and how it works with their operation. So those are key factors. The external envelope, it needs to look attractive, it needs to work in the environment, it needs to get planning consent, but those factors, there is some flexibility there. We've had lots of care homes, for example, with pitched roofs, and we've had huge problems in the recent months, and the recent months, of getting enough carpenters to put the roof on and enough materials for the pitched roofs. There's an option to look at potential flat roof schemes or partial flat roof schemes, which may take out a lot of the costs and the complexity of the roof designs, much as we like ornate roofs. And there's one behind my head now, which is on the screen, which is lots of dormers and roof constructions. It's not necessarily the best way to deliver a project at the moment, where we've got short supply of those materials and those resources. So it's looking and planning ahead and working out what it is you really want from the construction project, and providing the best buildable scheme that you can. That will help reduce your costs, and that's all stuff you can do before you start the tender process.
Brilliant. That's super helpful. Hopefully that would have been valuable to anyone looking at the process of building care homes in the not too distant future. So Nick, it's been a real pleasure to get to speak to you today. Thank you so much for your time and for sharing your knowledge.
No problem. Thank you very much.